Earthlings, welcome to another Still Alive. And as you can see, and in fact, as Michael predicted, we are still alive. You're in good fettle, are you, Ronnie?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. Yes, I got my cup of tea, so that helps always.
Oh well, you can't do wrong without that now. Now, did you get your film done for the NARM?
No, I've not done it yet, but I shall be doing it very soon.
Okay,
My
I had to re-record my one.
My little advert for the National. And have you done one as well, Roger? They asked you for one.
They asked me last week, but I put all the wrong details, and then it all got changed. So
I'll have to have a look at that.
So yeah, all I can say, Ronnie, is please record it while you're still alive. Terry loves a cup of tea as much as you, Ronnie, I think.
Yeah.
So I think I've asked this question before. Is it Terry Regan or Terry Reagan?
I'm sure it's Regan.
Regan, okay.
Terry said he'll confirm. I'm thinking it rhymes with vegan.
Yeah, it's funny because because people say Tom Regan and Tom Reagan, and I've always thought of Regan as being
Reese just said Regan,
with the A, like the president, right? And so
but I think who wants to be Reagan because of Ronald Reagan. No one wants to be.
No, that's
Reagan,
right. Nobody wants to be that. And so Michael got here first. So for goodness sake, and for the sake of goodness, you're still alive. Ronnie was saying, now you'll really regret it if one of us wasn't. Putting that ahead of the time. then we've got hello from Terry, Reagan and Regan and Vegan Paul, Vegan Pundit.
I mean, I've been called a vegan before now. I've had people say you're one of those vegans.
I've been called a Vogon, I think.
Oh well, I was even called a Vulcan.
A Vulcan.
Yeah, I was queuing up. Well, I was at the counter of a cafe and I asked them, what have you got without animal products? And the guy behind the counter said, you're one of those Vulcans.
Well,
my ears must have looked a bit pointy or something that day.
I know, you'd have thought the first thing that anybody would do is have a quick look, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
No, well, perhaps not then. Yeah. Got Graham in the house. Hello there, Bianca. Go on then, Rooch.
Everyone's into tea. It's good.
Yeah. So I've got a very upset cat with me at the moment. Come on. Here we go. Yeah. I got an interesting. I saw an interesting Facebook thing today, which might explain why she's not too happy. So I got some advice from Ronnie about that, but we shall see. Right, so I think we're up to date with everybody. I think so. Now, of course, go ahead with your comments. They're all free on this channel, so don't kind of worry about that. If you're panicking, like this kind of thing. And for anybody who's not watching on my YouTube channel, that's the best place to be if you want to see the full chat. You can comment on Facebook, and we will see it, and we will be able to answer it and everything. It's just that nobody else, you won't be able to see anybody's reply to you apart from us on screen. So that's the kind of limitation of it, really. So, Ronnie, you're all about saving the world today.
Yeah, I'm all about saving the world, and the world certainly does need saving, doesn't it? I mean, the most recent thing are these horrific fires in Greece and on the Greek islands, and obviously, what amuses me, you've got all these tourists, all in desperation and complaining they're not getting any help from the tour companies, and how do they get home, and there's all this stuff. And you think, well, you flew there, didn't you? You flew there So you kind of can't really complain, can you? Because seeing as flying is a major contributor to the climate crisis, it seems, and now you're kind of reaping what you've kind of sown, aren't you? Really, with not being
I
able
suppose
to.
there is that.
Yeah.
Did you see those comments saying that by the law of averages, there's bound to be some of the Brits there who have probably got a real hard line about immigration, and now they've virtually been turned into refugees. Wonder whether they will be.
That's it. Yeah, they don't mind. Don't go and mind themselves going off all over the world, but if like some poor people from another country in desperation come here, then they're all complaining, aren't they?
They are a little bit. Yeah, Debbie said that Nella was helping out. Yeah, she sent a couple of videos.
You see, obviously, it's not great for the humans there, but it's massively worse for for other animals. Particularly, animals living in the wild. I mean, how many of those have perished? And
I think it depends on the species, because the film that Nella sent, Ronnie, they were digging underground and finding lots of tortoises, and most of those seem to have survived, and so I think they got as deep as possible and got into
if they can. Yeah, I think if they can escape, but they estimate that the fires in Australia, I think, was that earlier this year, or was it? It may have been last year. There's an estimate that they killed about 3 billion other animals.
It's in the billions, isn't it?
And that's that's absolutely horrific. And this is through something that's been caused by humans, by the climate crisis that's been caused by humans.
Birds can't outfly it, and I suppose if there's kind of lakes or ponds, and you've got a fire all the way around it, then
and of course because the other thing we've had it locally is when water heats up, then it loses oxygen, and just locally here in rivers and canals, there's been loads of fish found dead and dying because of oxygen depletion of the water, because the water's heated up too much, and they've had to try and
that's just the rise in temperature, nothing else.
That's the rise in that's just the general rise in temperature. Yeah, through global heating, which has been caused by humans, and so we're kind of facing that crisis. And the fundamental cause of the climate crisis is speciesism, and is the oppression of other animals. And I've said this before many times, and that operates in two ways. First of all, because animal agriculture, and indeed the fishing industry as well, all of that is a major. I mean, animal agriculture is a major contributor to the climate crisis. I mean, if you take into account what's called opportunity costs, in other words, if we didn't have animal agriculture and that land, went back to, was rewilded, went back to forest, the amount of carbon dioxide could be drawn out of the atmosphere, that is taken into account as well as emissions, then it's been estimated that animal agriculture is 87% responsible for the climate crisis. And then, of course,
I saw that Benny Malone had put a thing out today on Instagram, I think it was, a new report saying that they're predicting the next pandemic is going to be caused by the United States animal agriculture.
It wouldn't at all surprise me, because there's really strong evidence that the COVID pandemic was came from the oppression of other animals, and indeed we've kind of had this all the time. Right back to like the Spanish flu over 100 years ago. That came from, that originated from animal farming. You see,
a new outbreak of avian flu in Kent.
Yeah, exactly, and that comes from like the intensive farming of birds. So all these things, all these ways that humans oppress other animals, actually are leading to the the downfall of our own, destruction of our own species, and even in terms of the other major contributor to the climate crisis, which is the burning of fossil fuels, which kind of really began in a big way with the Industrial Revolution. Well, that wouldn't have been allowed to happen if people had proper respect for other animals, because the amount of destruction and harm that the Industrial Revolution did to the natural world, was so great that in a vegan run society, that would have never been allowed to happen. So we wouldn't have had the problems that we've got now due to the burning of fossil fuels. So even that aspect of the climate crisis is a result of speciesism. So in order to, if we're really going to, if humans are going to adopt a philosophy whereby we become determined to properly combat the climate crisis, then that philosophy has to be veganism. It has to be an anti-speciesist philosophy, because it's speciesism that caused it, and it's veganism that can solve the problem.
That's interesting to me, Ronnie, because it's a question of whether people join all the dots that lead to veganism, which is the thing. Because I saw this really interesting interview with Noam Chomsky, who said some really kind of ignorant things about veganism. But he was talking about Greta Thunberg and saying that she stood up in front of all these world leaders and said, "You have betrayed us." And he was saying it was true. Our generation had betrayed their generation, But whether everybody would make the connection all the way to veganism as we believe everybody needs to is another matter, isn't it?
Well, yes, but what we need to do is kind of to help people do that, isn't it? Through, I mean, first of all, through massively spreading the vegan message, but making sure that message is the right message in terms of veganism, in terms of veganism being a philosophy that's opposed to all oppression and exploitation. Including in obviously in particular the oppression of and exploitation by humans of other animals, because that's that's the kind of the by far the biggest area of it, isn't it? And so we have to, when we kind of spread the vegan message, we have to be clear as to what veganism is, that it's not just a diet, that it is a much wider philosophy than that. And it's that philosophy that we need to encourage people to embrace. As people embrace that philosophy, that truly is what can save the world, what can save the planet, or certainly preserve a planet that's inhabitable for us, and indeed most other animal species as well. And that this is why vegan outreach is so massively important, because it's not just about saving and protecting other animals. It's about the actual salvation of our own species as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because obviously some people will take the almost like the animals only line, that we're a bit of a pestilence on the world, and it's hard to argue against that. Well, at the same time, if you think about the vegan social movement, it's made up of humans, and so it's in terms of animal liberation relies on humans, unless the entire human race gets wiped out by some force, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, that there are some people that believe it would be good for the human species to become extinct. I mean, I sympathise that point of view, and I understand why they kind of believe that. I mean, my view is that we're an animal that's evolved alongside the other animals, and so there is a place for us on this planet, but we need to live on this planet in a way that's fair and just in relation to the other animals, and that's something that we kind of definitely don't do. And so I think
there's an imbalance, isn't there, though, Ronnie, in our development? I mean, it's as though we become very, very clever, but not very, very wise.
Oh, absolutely, and I think that's true. I think kind of maybe there's a part of our brain that's developed, far quicker than the rest of our brain. And it's the part of the brain that's not developed that is where wisdom lies, perhaps. And so all we've done is we've become more adept at destroying things. Instead of going round hitting one another with clubs. We now have weapons of mass destruction. We now have nuclear weapons, don't we? At the kind of sort of extreme end of.
From a vegan point of view, Ronnie, our knife and fork has been a weapon of mass destruction, hasn't it?
Well, yeah. Well, no. I mean, absolutely, yes. That just and a huge. When we consider that it's 60,000. No, it's 50,000. I think. Yeah, 50,000 animals a second are slaughtered for food. Throughout the world, every second, and that's due to the knife fork.
Just in Britain, do you know the British numbers?
The British. No, I think here it's 250 a second. It is a bit more than the world average, because I think over here we tend to consume more animal products than there are a lot of countries in the world where the amount of animal products they don't consume is
and also export.
I would imagine. I'd imagine that a country like the USA would be more than the UK.
Yeah.
See, but it's about, it's about 250 a second, I think, here.
Yeah, and going back to earlier themes, Ronnie, it makes a nonsense of calling ourselves a nation of animal lovers when the nation is dotted with slaughterhouses and you've got that kind of carnage going on second by second.
Well, absolutely, yes. I mean, it's kind of it's totally ridiculous. I mean, maybe that it's been claimed that the UK is a nation of animal lovers, mainly because a lot of people over here have dogs and cats in their home. I think that's kind of why that is. But that is a totally false claim.
It seems obvious to me, though, Ronnie, that if you wanted to go down that animal loving road at all, and I personally wouldn't, but if you did want to, you'd surely put it. We're supposed to be a nation, wouldn't you?
Yeah. We claim, it's claimed that we're a nation of animal lovers, but that obviously is massively untrue. But to actually make the plain statement we are a nation of animal lovers it's first of all untrue. It's first of all untrue, and secondly hugely unhelpful.
Yeah. So this is the Kent outbreak.
Yeah, I mean, it's horrendous because of course it leads to it doesn't just lead to birds dying from bird flu, but it leads to loads of other ones being killed to try and stem the spread of bird flu.
My fear, Ronnie, is that cultural speciesism is so deep that it's almost like it's kind of almost unshakable. Because I mean, three examples. You can think of there was a big expose on Irish TV, and I'm speaking from Dublin, about the greyhound racing industry. It hasn't changed anything. About 2 weeks ago, there was a big expose of the Irish dairy industry, and it hasn't changed anything at all. And then when I was doing my PhD, 2001, there was the mad cow disease, and all there was kind of coverage on this issue on a daily basis, that all the pyres burning, big mountains of other animals being, thrown into shallow graves and then set on fire, and all that hasn't changed anything.
But I don't know whether that's because people aren't making the connection, and we need to do a lot more to kind of help them, encourage them, educate them to make the connection, and that can only be done through vegan outreach. Because of course, if you have an expose of something, but people aren't then properly given the message as to what they themselves.
Yeah. I mean, the latest one was exactly the problem that you identified. And I mean, there's no animal rights voices. In fact, no. Somebody described the solution, was described as an animal rights person, and they thought that the solution to live exports in Ireland was to open veal farms in Ireland. Yeah. I mean, and they were characterizing the show as animal rights advocates. So there you go.
I mean, I think you can sometimes that you could have. You've kind of gotten a bit big expose, but you haven't got the right message with it. But we could kind of supply the message to kind of follow on from the expose. I'll give an example of that, something we did locally. You remember last year, they were called Animal Rebellion, that is now Animal Rising, Animal Rebellion. They did blockades of some dairy industry supply depots. They were kind of Moolah and Arla, I think, mainly over here, and they got a lot of publicity. But the message they were putting out is, oh, you know, we want a plant-based future. Somehow we think that these actions, you know, blockading these dairy depots is going to somehow persuade the government to move the country to a plant-based future. I think that was kind of what the aim of it was. There's no mention of the need for people to go vegan. But what we did locally, because this, you know, that got quite a lot of publicity in the national papers. What we did locally was we had a big door dropping campaign just directly following that, regarding the dairy industry and encouraging people to go vegan. So we thought, well, we'll kind of build on that publicity. Although that publicity didn't have a vegan message, we kind of added the vegan message to it, if you see what I mean, because people are maybe already, you know, thinking about the dairy industry because of the national publicity. So I think, you know, sometimes that can happen in response to exposés, and so what's in the exposé can form part of that and sort of help in that way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, we've got a kind of historical example of this idea that veganism can save the world, haven't we? But have you got anything more of your opening statement?
No, I think if you see, you know, have a look at this quote, and then I can.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, this is where it comes from. So this is actually a 2002 interview with Donald Watson, the best known of the founders of the Vegan Society, and it's available on so it's Roger who did it, and it's still available if you just put into search engine Donald Watson interview 2002. It should get there. And then going back to, if I probably lost it now, but well, okay, I'll switch it to this is the bit from that, which is the bit that we wanted to focus on. And I've used this in talks before, but what did you want to say about this one, Ronnie?
Well, I'd like to say I agree, really, because for me that the veganism is a kind of overarching philosophy that kind of includes everything, and kind of where it kind of I suppose you know, like all these other movements are all about you know, all about human rights and against injustices committed by you know one group of humans against another group of humans, whereas veganism, I mean, first of all, it is about opposition to speciesism, which is the exploitation and oppression of other animals by humans. And in terms of suffering and slaughter, that's by far the greatest area on Earth where that occurs. You see, so all these other movements, you know, kind of miss that out, and whereas veganism includes that, but veganism also applies to all those, you know, all the other movements as well, because as well as being a philosophy that opposes speciesism, it kind of also is a philosophy that kind of opposes all other forms of exploitation and oppression, because it's kind of it's not, you know, it's, you know, these other areas of oppression and exploitation are not consistent with veganism. You know, racism is not consistent with veganism. Sexism is not consistent with veganism. Homophobia is not consistent with veganism. I would argue capitalism isn't consistent with veganism. Capitalism is a form of exploitation. Okay, so it's a form of exploitation of humans by other humans. But how can you be opposed to the exploitation of other animals by humans? And how is it then consistent to not be opposed to the exploitation of humans by humans? In order to be consistent, with veganism, you'd have to be opposed to human on-human exploitation as well. You see, so therefore, in my view, veganism covers everything, and I think any problem in the world that was mentioned or talked about, veganism would be the solution to it.
Yeah, well, I think I'd agree with that. I don't know whether you've been. Let me just get it up for it. It's quite interesting. Don't know whether you've looked at my Facebook page today, Ronnie. I don't think you will have,
No.
in fact. But so this is that, and I posted this today, which is exactly what you just said. See if we can get it big. So I posted this today. Which is what you just said.
Yeah, veganism comes forward because you see, the thing is, like, kind of how do we, how do we determine what veganism means? Well, the thing is, we really, the only way you can really determine what it means is it's not something that people can just make up and just make up what they think veganism is. Well, people do try to these days, but that isn't, that you straight away can question that and say, well, look, if you want to really define what veganism is, you have to go back to what the founders of the vegan movement wanted it to be, because they're the people that kind of invented it. Well, they certainly invented the word vegan and the word veganism. I think there were people that were like lived according to vegan principles without calling it vegan. I think there are people hundreds of years ago that did that. But like, if you're looking at the word vegan and the word veganism, that only goes back to what was 1944, the foundation of the Vegan Society, and then Leslie Cross sort of defined veganism, didn't he? Was that in 1950, 51? That's kind of the era where it kind of comes from, and you've got to look back. But there's and so that's the first thing I'd say. But then what tends to happen is you get people that kind of have their own interpretation of that. I mean, one thing that we kind of need to kind of kick out the window straight away is this idea that veganism is just a diet, because it's absolutely clear. It's absolutely clear from what the founders of the vegan movement said that it's more than a diet. There's no argument or foundation whatsoever for the claim that veganism is only a diet. So that that we can get rid of that one straight away. But then you've got kind of some people say that, well, veganism is only about other animals. It's only about the kind of wrongful treatment of other animals by humans. So there's that, and then you get some people that say veganism is only about exploitation and doesn't cover other forms of how can we say, doesn't cover like oppression, if you see what I mean. In other words, that the way that humans behave wrongfully towards other animals, there are ways that humans do that aren't covered by exploitation. But there's some people say, well, that's nothing to do. Those areas aren't anything to do with veganism. In other words, like like the climate crisis wouldn't be of concern to vegans, because that isn't that isn't where animals are. It's not the exploiter. It's those animals that are kind of harmed directly by the climate crisis. They're not being exploited by humans. What's happened to them is kind of as a result of something else, if you see what I mean. And so you've got these differing interpretations of. Are
you saying you don't agree with this, Ronnie? It's a relatively
well, I mean, how many things are wrong with that? I mean, first of all, it's a relatively young movement. Well, I suppose it depends, but when they say it's a relatively young movement, and they just saying it started with Gary Yourofsky or something like that,
not this particular person, but I know what you mean. Some people do say that.
And it's about food. Well, no, it's absolutely not about food, and you only have to kind of look at what the founders of the vegan movement said, because some of the people that kind of argue that it's about food, they've got this thing about, well, Donald Watson meant it to be just about food, but then Leslie Cross came along and said it was about animal liberation, and kind of he somehow sort of muscled in on the act, and it was really Donald Watson. But Donald Watson has said that it's a movement that opposes the exploitation of all
Well, he said
sentient.
it right there. It's the only
Right.
one that can save mankind.
So Donald Watson. So these people that try to use Donald Watson as a justification, like for veganism just being about food, they're not. They're absolutely wrong, because Donald Watson, is quite clear that Donald Watson believed it to be much more than that.
Yeah. What do you make of Rob's thing here, Ronnie? Just today, heard of an activist being banned by an organizer for attending future vegan outreach events because he talked about the climate crisis. Make this make sense?
Well, that's
Ronnie,
I mean, that's just. I mean, that's just. I mean, the people that have banned him failed to understand, the true meaning of vegans. And what I'd say to them is what I'd say to them, rather than, because you can kind of you'd say, well, how have you come to your, what you believe veganism to be? How have you arrived at that? And so you have a discussion about that. And if they've just made it up in their own head, then you can say, well, no, you've got to look at like what the founders intended, because that's the only way you can arrive at what it really is, right? But they say, yeah, we have done, but it's just about being opposed to the exploitation of other animals by humans. So, the harm that is caused to other animals through the climate crisis, that's not the concern of veganism, because we have to remember that the main victims of the climate crisis are other animals. This is something that's been created by humans, and the major victims are other animals. In fact, within the human species, the main victims are the very people that didn't create the climate crisis, because they're the poorer people on Earth that kind of are much less to blame for the emissions and the industry and everything that's caused it. And unless all these vegans are climate change deniers, of course, they'll kick this guy out. But you see, but then what I would say to them is, okay, say you do believe that it's just against exploitation of other animals. Why are you opposed to that? Why do you want to end the exploitation of other animals? Where does that come from? And if they say, well, we don't want to see animals being killed, we don't want to see other animals suffering, then you could say, well, yeah, but what's happening? What's happening with the climate crisis? That's something that's been done by humans that's causes massive of other animals to suffer. So surely, it's inconsistent, to be opposed to the exploitation of animals for food or whatever, and not want to do something about the climate crisis. That it's inconsistent to kind of have those.
If the criteria is suffering, I mean, obviously this is, as Reagan would say, this is a complicated issue. But if the criteria is suffering, then there's been lots of talk about the idea of whether we should intervene with free living beings and all that. Well, on the kind of ecological side of that, I think most people, certainly in our generation, would probably say no. But where we should intervene is by not us ourselves as our species doing things that's going to burn down their habitat, like happened in Greece. So that's the kind of suffering that we could have prevented, rather than kind of prey and kind of predator prey relationship.
And of course there is a kind of a crossover, really, because obviously the biggest cause really of the climate crisis is animal farming. If you take into account what I explained earlier was the opportunity costs, then obviously campaigning to end animal farming, or turning people vegan so that they kind of no longer contribute to that and would even take political action against that, is obviously a big way of combating the climate crisis, because you see, animal agriculture really kills animals twice. It kills the animals that are directly, sent to the slaughterhouse, but it then also kills all the other animals, say, living in the wild, that perish because the adverse effect on the natural world, that animal agriculture causes, both through, its contribution to the climate crisis, through pollution. I mean, there's huge numbers of animals are killed. Like fishes, for instance, marine animals are killed through the runoff, from animal farms. So it's like kind of it's the kind of major, really, animal agriculture is the major contributor to the to the killing of other animals.
Let me play devil's advocate with you a little bit, Ronnie, in the sense that when you say about the founders, when I was talking to some people, some relatively new vegans a few years ago, they ended up saying F the founders. They're not relevant to today. That was then. This is now. Do you not have any sympathy for that? Well, why should we talk? Why should we talk about people who use sexist language and all the rest of it?
Well, you see, the thing is, it's like saying, it's like saying if we were going to have a conversation about Marxism and somebody says, "Oh, fuck Karl Marx and what he said," that's not important. You think, what? It's like that, isn't it? Really, that kind of you have to. That's the only way of really establishing, like, kind of what veganism is. Okay, there might be a dispute about what the founders meant in what they said, but nevertheless, you still have to go back to that to determine, what
But it is true that movements evolve as well. So, in that sense, their views are not set in stone, right, Ronnie?
Well, I think what's not set in stone is maybe, the way they put things, the language they used, and the kind of.
Yeah, well, I think some of the values should be set in stone.
Yeah, I think that the fundamental values of opposition to the exploitation of other animals, and obviously that's to me that would be something that was set in stone. I mean, some of the language they use, like, for instance, Donald Watson here has talked about mankind. Well, we wouldn't use mankind today. We'd talk about humanity or humankind, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
Now, but the meaning is still the same.
Absolutely. Actually, on that point, myself and Andy Atkinson, who seems to be absent today, we're updating some of the classic texts, and what we're doing is not changing the meaning, but changing the sexist language, because there's quite a lot of calling other animals it, and there's a heck of a lot of calling humanity man.
Yes,
and his and all this kind of stuff. So we're updating that, and then Andy is narrating them. So it's kind of on modern ears, I think, is what we're.
Yes, and I think I think it's very good that that's being done, because obviously, if this had been written in a foreign language, it would be translated to English, wouldn't it? For English readers, and it's kind of the same. What's happening? It's been translated into the way we would put things in the modern day. It's like even in over here, like, you got the works of people like Geoffrey Chaucer hundreds of years ago. You try and read that, that's written in the English of the day. Try and read that, you can hardly understand it unless it's translated into
Shakespeare.
So, well, yeah, and that Shakespeare would probably be a little bit similar. I think Chaucer's kind of harder to understand, but it's the same, isn't it? It's just been translated into modern, into the way we say things these days.
People are only interested in Chaucer for the dirty bits, anyway. So,
yeah, the Miller's Tale, isn't it? The Miller's Tale is the dirty one.
Canterbury Tales, isn't it?
Yeah. The Miller's Tale. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Ronnie, a couple of things about what's been said here. First of all, do you think this is a very arrogant thing for Watson to say, or do you agree?
No, I mean, I agree. I agree. I agree. And if people say it's arrogant, then I think it's important to explain. Well, hang on a minute. If you've got a movement that is opposed to all oppression and is opposed to all exploitation, then it's got to be the greatest movement ever, hasn't it? You know.
Yeah, it's like somebody said on Facebook the other day that veganism is the ultimate peace movement, and that will be true too.
Yeah, of course it is, because look, you wouldn't have war, would you? You know, I mean, war is just war is kind of just lunacy, isn't it? For fuck's sake, you know. No, and you see, the thing is, you know, of course, you know, the harm done, you know, by to humans, you know, by war is horrendous, but the harm done to other animals by war is even more. You know, the main victims of war in terms of number are actually other animals. You think of the forests that are destroyed, you know, all the animals that are killed in, you know, when a bomb drops, because of course you've got all the animals that are kind of living in that area, kind of, you know, within nature, you know, the free living animals, you know, that they'd all be destroyed. So they, you know, they are the main, and you know, then you've got ones in the past have been directly used in war, you know, like the horses and the pigeons and all that have been killed.
Yeah, I know, not to mention the experiments done for mustard gas,
you know, warfare experiments to develop like nerve gases and all these bloody things like that goes on at Portham Down. You know, it's other animals that are kind of the main victims of war.
Well, going back to this then, the potential arrogant bit is that where he calls lesser movements, I suppose he's talking about kind of single issue really, rather than veganism.
Yes, well, I think he'd be talking about single issue movements in terms of, like, you know, there's different sorts of single issues. I mean, there's single issues within, you know, you know, where people are trying to protect other animals, you know, like, for instance, the anti-vivisection movement and the anti-hunting movement, you know, people campaigning against zoos and circuses. And then there's also movements where people are, you know, like, against sexism, against racism, and, you know, the human issues. There's all of those as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and of course, you know, we say to feminists, can you see what we're doing in speciesism against, you know, the female reproduction systems of other animals, right? And
exactly.
So,
but you see, it's inconsistent with veganism to be, say, an anti-feminist, if you see what I mean. You know, like the, you know, to kind of be okay.
And that's the basis of our challenge to them, is that you should be anti-speciesist. We're anti-sexist like you. You should be anti-speciesist.
Well, to be consistent with veganists, we kind of have to be. I mean, there's people that say, "Oh, it's nothing to do with it," but it's kind of everything to do with it. Even if people don't believe, you know, if people are like really, really strict on what they believe the definition of veganism say, and it's only about the exploitation of other animals by humans. Say someone believes that, and they think that that's what what the founders of the vegan movement intended, right? Then what you do is say, well, yes, but wait a minute, you know, how is you believe the exploitation of other animals by humans to be wrong? So therefore, how is it consistent for you not to be opposed to the oppression of other animals by humans? And how is it consistent for you not to be opposed to the oppression of one group of humans by another group of humans? You see, even if they don't think that is
well, the answer to that, there is an answer to that, which is that you've got one group of people being oppressive to another group of humans, but both groups of humans are oppressive towards other animals.
But that's very true. But in terms of in terms of a moral standpoint and believing something to be wrong, yes, okay. So you've got these two,
like a moral principle, as Leslie Cross keeps talking about.
It's a moral principle. You see that, you know, like, I know that you know, the group of humans that are oppressed aren't perfect either, that they, you know, maybe most of them eat animals, but the principle of it's still wrong that oppression should take place. It's like a moral, in terms of moral philosophy, it's kind of still wrong, and it's still something we should be opposed to. To be opposed to that to be opposed to like one, you know, to be opposed to, say, the oppression of some kind of, enslaved workers by some kind of tyrant boss, right, doesn't mean that you support the fact that those enslaved workers eat animal products. Doesn't mean that you support that. You just believe that oppression is morally wrong.
That's right. It seems as though they're making a connection that's not there.
It's not there. You don't need to be opposed to the oppression caused to one group of humans by another. Doesn't mean that you kind of agree with everything that the oppressed group of humans do. You're opposed to that oppression. You believe that oppression to be morally wrong.
Yes, indeed. Just changing my background because I'm getting all kind of interference now. Ronnie, you said something interesting today. Let me just. This is my version of what we've been looking at, the Watson thing. This is the end bit. So I tried to make it into a meme. Don't suppose it's particularly good because I'm not very good at that. But I tried to do this thing about so the exploitation of sentient life, which is obviously Watson's big thing. The opposition to, obviously. Then you got the iceberg. Then you got the boat, which is called veganism, and this is where he's talking about putting the searchlight on the iceberg, which the others are kind of, if you like, too busy with their own smaller problems that they're not looking at the wider picture. That's what he's saying.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that we necessarily have to campaign on human rights issues as well as for veganism.
No, nobody ever says that though, does they?
But it just means that our moral standpoint needs to be opposed to all oppression. Otherwise, it's not consistent with veganism. That's the thing. And I think there's some confusion that they think, oh, that means that you kind of have to campaign against kind of all these other issues. Well, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that.
Yeah, I think what Deb's saying here, this is, I mean, you kind of get this all the time. You can oppose the oppression of slaughterhouse workers without endorsing them being slaughterhouse.
Oh, absolutely, because you can say, well, that oppression is that oppression is actually morally wrong. It doesn't mean that those slaughterhouse workers in turn themselves aren't doing something that's morally wrong. You can say it's all wrong. You can say all of it's wrong. And there's nothing inconsistent in kind of doing that,
Now here's a fun fact. Ronnie, you said that you heard that the Titanic didn't have any deck chairs.
Yeah, there was someone there was someone claiming that there was no deck chairs on the Titanic. But in fact, I kind of looked into that, and it seems that's not true. And there were deck chairs. I found an article by someone who was actually responsible for arranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. So I don't know whether he kind of did it from I don't know. I suppose some people survived. Some people survived the Titanic sinking. I think they maybe
quite a few people did.
I think that person did. Yeah. But it said, it was a very important job that they had to be arranged all properly and everything. So it's true. There were deck chairs.
I wonder whether there were third-class deck chairs and first-class deck chairs. I wonder.
Well, yeah, I don't know whether there were different deck chairs according to how much you paid, but I mean, there aren't any deck chairs on it now.
Hey, look, Ronnie, you're getting spam from downstairs in your house.
Oh, blimey! Yeah, I'll be told off now. Hi, Louise. It's good to see you that you're listening to us. You probably regret it.
Regret it. I don't think you could say anything that she hasn't heard a million times already.
No. She said, I mean, the thing about Louise is that she's like my prompt, because all my stories that I tell, like sometimes I'll forget, and then she just fills in. She'll just carry on the story where I've forgotten it. So it's quite.
I say that last week. You just have to give you one word, and you usually got 20 minutes on it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but she's in court tomorrow. She's in court tomorrow for they did that where they put all the paint over the entrance to the Sequani Animal Research Laboratory. It was earlier this year. I think it was in.
So what was the charge? Criminal damage?
Criminal damage. Yeah, they're up in court in Hereford tomorrow. There's 4 of them actually. One of them didn't get charged. So there's 4 of them, on criminal damage charges. So
And how come one didn't get charged? That's a bit weird.
because they didn't have, I think it's because they didn't have anything on the CCTV of her causing damage.
Ah, right.
I mean, she could have been charged with other things, but they didn't bother because I think she padlocked herself.
She was just a getaway driver.
Yeah. Well, he didn't try and get away, you see. This was the thing, you know, they kind of handcuffed themselves to the gate, and then the police took ages to come, you know, which was why they were able to put
Yeah, we did a
all over
show,
the-
didn't we, where we showing pictures
Yeah, we
of
did.
it,
Yeah,
and
we did do a show. Yeah, but
they
they
had these kind of stereotypical glum faces. We thought,
but one of the
they'd
things is that they're claiming, the laboratory is claiming that there was £500 worth of damage caused, which is ridiculous because it was like this chalk paint, you know, the eco-friendly chalk paint that, and they just got some hoses and just washed it all away because it wasn't meant to be like
Are they
permanent. It was
claiming they
meant
had to send some kind of specialist cleaning unit in there?
No, they just, the workers just come out, you know, the security guards just come out with hoses and just hosed it all away afterwards.
Right.
You know, because it was meant to be like eco-friendly. It wasn't meant to be like permanent. It was because it was an awareness raising exercise rather than,
and does chalk paint work? I mean, I don't think I've painted anything for 25 years. So does chalk paint work?
It's not like a permanent, you know, what they did, it wasn't like permanent paint. It was like it just
So what's
away.
it used for, chalk paint?
Yeah, I think it's just used for, you know, if you want to do something, you know, paint something it temporarily, and then
Dad saying, did you find so it's I mean, it's like chalking on the street then, really, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but you know, technically chalking on the pavement is criminal damage.
Yeah,
you know, people think that it doesn't matter if it's temporary. Anything like that, you know, I know people that have been cautioned by the police for chalking on the pavement, you know, because it was regarded as a criminal offence.
But the thing is, has it been tested in court, that though?
Well, there have been equivalent cases, yes. I mean, for instance, there was a guy that smeared mud on his cell wall. A prisoner smeared wood on the wall of his cell, which was easily washed off, and he was convicted of criminal damage. So it kind of has been tested.
Well, there's been a lot of the dirty protests, wasn't there? But
yeah. Yeah, but so people don't realise it's any little, you know.
I suppose that's an organic material, isn't it?
It kind of is, yeah. And then really, what they used was sort of organic.
I probably did criminal damage to my cell wall then, because we used to. I did anyway. We used to put all the pictures up with toothpaste.
Yeah. I used to do that. I had other prisoners used to come and see my cell because certainly when I was in Long Lartin, the whole of my cell was covered in pictures. You know, people used to send me, you know, cards in, and then we had pictures of animals, and I had posters. Even the ceiling, I even had all the ceiling covered in posters. The whole thing was, and what I did, I had a thing of like putting one thing up a day. It was like my routine. I'd put one picture up a day, and see how long I was in there for. That the whole of the cell eventually was covered. You know,
and then you got about 5 years away, and they go, right, Lee, we're moving cells.
Well, yeah, I mean, I did have to, you know, was moved to another prison, then I started doing it there as well, and I think most of that cell was covered in pictures as well.
Okay, so let's get away from cells and go back to let's get back to saving the planet. And so, is there anything more to be said about this issue, do you think, Ronnie?
Well, I think the thing is, you know, this is why, like I've said, that any kind of issue of oppression or exploitation is covered by veganism, because to not be opposed to that exploitation and oppression is inconsistent with the vegan ethic, you see. So, you know, in that sense, it is an all-embracing philosophy. And so, you know,
Ronnie, the thing that goes against that, Ronnie, is the fact that people look around, and especially, you know, it goes. I mean, like I know that in terms of like the career of a vegan, let's call it that, when you get 3, 4, 5 years in, you can get pretty kind of pissed off with humanity at that stage.
Yeah.
You know, and so in the end, some people just don't care what happens to humans, right?
Well, I'm. I mean, I'm pissed off with humanity. I'm not fond of the human species, and like most people, you know, I kind of view with. I kind of view them with disdain in a way, because they kind of don't seem to care about anything. They're kind of living out their tiny lives and don't see anything outside
Yeah,
of that.
well, I think that the last pandemic was very depressing for that very reason, that they just don't seem to connect to
people,
anything.
and so it's very easy to kind of, you know, it is like easy to kind of get to a stage you don't care about other people. I can understand that, but that doesn't affect the moral principle. You see, it doesn't affect the moral principle. It's like, say, you know, we have a society where, you know, there's people sleeping on the street. You know, some people live in a mansion, other people sleeping on the street. Well, okay, so those people that are sleeping on the street might, you know, might consume animal products, but nevertheless, that is still wrong. That is still morally wrong. That is the way our society operates, and then we have a political economic system that allows that to operate. That's still morally wrong. You know, the fact that the person on the street themselves might be doing something is morally wrong, say in the consumption of animal products, doesn't affect the principle that it's morally wrong for our society to exist in the way that there's people living on the streets. I mean, that's just one example.
Yeah,
You know,
and
so
that also invokes something else that Watson said, is that he said that we can now start seeing how interconnected things are, and we won't get one without the other, and veganism has got to be central to all of it. That's what he said, which is basically what you've been saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if we're going to kind of, you know, if we are going to save the world, and we're not just going to save the world from destruction, and you know, obviously, in terms of you know, destruction of, like, I mean, obviously the world's not going to be like totally destroyed, but you know, the destruction of like things as we kind of know it in a big way, you know, like could be caused by the climate crisis, and you know, the other big threat, nuclear war. You know, that's the other thing that could kind of totally annihilate, you know, most, you know, living beings on the planet. You know, all these things that veganism also offers a solution to. Like, we wouldn't have nuclear weapons in you know, nuclear weapons are totally inconsistent with veganism. We wouldn't have nuclear weapons. We wouldn't have war. That's totally inconsistent with veganism. You know,
well,
so
that's exactly what Kathleen Janaway said. She gave a speech in the 1990s. She said, if we can solve the problem of veganism, in other words, bring about a vegan world, then that would solve war.
Absolutely. So this is why spreading the vegan message is so vitally important. It's not just important in terms of, like, you know, saving the other animals or sparing a huge number of animals from suffering and slaughter. I mean, that would be good enough if it was just that, but in fact, it's massively more than that. It's about actually, you know, saving the world for our own species as well, and it's also about bringing about a world that's fair and just, not just for other animals, but for humans as well. So it's
okay. Well, look, Elliot has got an interesting point, because basically saying the kind of thing about moral patients and moral agents, that the one thing that we generally say about other animals is that they're moral patients, although that is being criticized by some people lately. But would that make the difference in terms of where our sympathy lies, as it were?
Well, I think I probably already covered that when I spoke about the homeless people. You could say, well, you know, a homeless person isn't like morally innocent because they probably still consume animal products. But nevertheless, it's still wrong. It's still immoral that we have a society where people are homeless. So it's not really dependent. It's not, you know, the fact that that's wrong isn't dependent on the victim being totally innocent.
Well, I remember one of the arguments you used when you were a press officer, which was that you would draw a distinction, a big differentiation between those who were innocent, like the consumer of something, and those who weren't, like the producer of something. So say vivisector and person who consumes the product of vivisection.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question of like, I think it's more to do with degrees of guilt. I mean, particularly with the consumption of animal products, like it can be very difficult, and I think animal experimentation is possibly a more difficult area, because you kind of do have people that are kind of taking.
Well, okay, well, butcher and somebody eats a sausage then.
Right. Okay. Well. The person who eats a sausage, I'd say, isn't innocent, right? And unless they're kind of somebody that's kind of got no knowledge or conception that comes from another animal, But if they kind of do, know where that comes from and think, sod it, I'm going to eat this anyway, right? Then yeah, I think they do. That they are culpable. But you see, a person who encourages that and promotes that is even more culpable. So say if you've got a criminal gang and you've got the big leader of the criminal gang that organizes everything, and then you've got the minions that do the bidding of that person, who is the most guilty of those? It's the big boss that's the most guilty. It doesn't mean the other ones aren't guilty, but there's degrees of culpability. And I'd say that someone that is a consumer of animal products doesn't bear the same degree of guilt as someone that kind of is promoting animal products and is encouraging people to consume them.
Yeah, but what about this point? And I think I'd challenge this a little bit, Deb, in the sense that at least if we take them at their word, so many people are totally ignorant of many things. I mean, like, people seem to be ignorant that cows are mammals and therefore need to be pregnant to lactate and this kind of stuff. And so there is still a lot of that kind of innocence about, isn't there? It's not as though
I think some people tend to default towards the position that allows them to continue living as they already are. If they kind of, there's a sort of like kind of seems to be like a range of choices in their head, they'll default towards that. So what you've got to do is make it clear that position isn't a tenable position. In other words, that people might like to believe, I kind of like to believe that cows have to be milked and we save their life. They'd explode if we didn't milk them.
Yeah, people say that, don't they? They do say that. Yeah, they would explode. So yeah, this is the InReach point, Ronnie. He said, unfortunately, I don't think many people with that view watch his channel. So
well, I think that's true. Yeah, people will watch what channels they want, just the same as people read whatever newspaper they want to read it, don't they? But I think yes, I agree with this idea. About speaking to those people, because that's the conversation I'd have directly with someone like that. I'd kind of like, seek to explore why they hold the position they do, and kind of attempt to point out the inconsistency of that view. I mean, that is why I think that, to use the terminology of something being inconsistent with veganism, it's probably better to say to someone, you're not vegan, because you flew in an aeroplane, you're not vegan. I don't think that kind of helps really. I think it's far better to have a conversation about, well,
yeah, I strongly agree with that, especially when we're talking about the left-leaning, right-leaning kind of argument, because it's not saying if you're right-wing you can't be vegan. You're just saying, well, how does your right-wing values coexist with your vegan values?
Yeah. I mean, I made a video about you can't be a right-wing vegan, and it was good in terms of that it kind of brought the issue to light. But on reflection, that probably isn't the best way of approaching it. It's by saying, okay, you've got right-wing views, rather than accusing you of not being a vegan, but asking you, well, how are those consistent with veganism? And I think that is a far better way of approaching it.
Yeah, because then the answer comes out, animals only, and well, human, so the stuff that we've talked about today become their answers, because that's what they rely on.
Yes, and then you kind of then all the time you kind of challenge that. What it's about is consistency. It's about consistency. It's like you can't be to be anti-speciesist but not to be anti-racist is inconsistent. You know, they're in, you know, it's like, you know, you can't, the two don't go together, because, you know, anti-speciesism is about oppression of a, you know, another being, because the other being's different in some way. Well, racism's the same as that, isn't it? Sexism's the same as that. Homophobia is the same as that. You know, so you know, to be consistent, you have to be opposed to all these things.
I agree with this as well from Terry. I love that video. Talk about your right-wing video. I always link it when right-wing vegan.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, I think it kind of, yeah. I think it kind of sort of served a purpose.
Yeah, but going back to what Watson said, Ronnie, it's kind of, I mean, it's almost like, you know, how you're appreciating that we're not saying, well, veganism is better because we do more of the anti-oppression stuff than just the single issue ones, which is exactly what Watson is saying, right? And so they seem to want to reduce it to the lesser movements. They want to take veganism and reduce it to be just another lesser movement, just focusing on one thing.
No, I don't understand it, because people can still totally focus on campaigning for other animals.
Yeah, well, that's the other problem, is the fact that they've created a problem that doesn't really exist.
It doesn't exist, because they can still. It's just that, yeah, I focus on campaigning against speciesism, but yes, of course, I'm opposed to racism. Of course, I'm opposed to sexism. Of course, I'm opposed to capitalism, because capitalism is a form of exploitation, and also as well as being a form of exploitation.
Okay, but the answer to that point is stay in your lane. That it's okay to be anti-racist and anti-speciesist and all that, but these are separate issues and they don't overlap.
Well, but they are related issues. They are related.
I'd say there's a big overlap.
Yeah. You see,
just the principle of justice overlaps.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You know, they're closely related. And the thing about capitalism is capitalism actually causes more harm even to other animals than it causes to humans, because it just, you know, it drives the destruction of the natural world, you know, through driving consumerism and, you know, greed and acquisition, and, you know, all the industrialization with making all the loads of stuff that we don't really need, but we're encouraged to have so that people can make a profit. You know, it's highly destructive. We can't have, if we, you know, the economic, you know, capitalist economics are not consistent with animal liberation. And that doesn't mean that we've ever had, you know, people say, oh yeah, but in these so-called socialist societies, you know, animals were still oppressed and exploited. Yeah, of course they were. They were, because, you know, those were still speciesist societies. And what we need is, you know, not to hark back to things we've had in the past, but to create something new. But the economic system that we create, you know, in order to ensure animal liberation, can't be capitalism.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there is well captured by this quote here by Kathleen Janaway. The present over-industrialized system degrades people to machine slaves and to program consumers of machine products.
Yeah,
depriving them of their creativity and the essentials of spiritual.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I absolutely agree with that.
I thought you might.
Yeah. I mean, everyone's got their own creativity in one way or another that's not allowed to express itself, because people are treated. All they want people to be is like wage slaves to earn money for the big bosses, really, and that's what the education system is aimed at, that and everything. And people aren't encouraged to, you know, pursue their own individual creativity. And the answer to that, to me, the answer to that is kind of like localism, really, that you kind of have more, instead of these big industries, you have cottage industries that serve the local area. And so, you know, where people can be more, so you don't have the same degree of industrialization. I think the same with agriculture, and you know, one thing that comes up a lot is crop deaths. You know, animals that are killed through harvesting, and non-vegans make a big thing of that, ignoring that it's non-vegans that are responsible for far more crop deaths than vegans, because of all the crops grown to feed the animals that they eat. But nevertheless, it is an issue for us, and like, you know, one solution to that would be to have, you know, agriculture done more in a manual way, where more people kind of worked on the land, And I actually think that would be good for people to be in contact with the earth, to be growing our own food. And it doesn't mean that people would just have to work from dusk till dawn, because
No, it'd be good for the environment too.
if enough people did it, then we couldn't. I mean, we all work far too much. People that work. When you think, the vast majority of most people's lives are spent doing a job which they probably hate, which is boring, and which is, like, in most cases serves no useful purpose in terms of providing the essentials of life for
In most cases, it just means using up the Earth's resources. So
and
there's the environmental.
we need a complete, like, reorganization of.
Are you familiar with Gerard Diamond, Ronnie?
No, I'm not
Because
actually.
he's got a book, and there's a chapter in it called "Agriculture's Double-Edged Sword," and he does allow for the fact that agriculture has created a lot more food, and it means that you can store food a lot better. But he's comparing forager society and our society now, and he was saying exactly what you said. He was saying the forager society, they've got this image that they must have been up at dawn and never stopped, and yet they did about 3 hours
Because
a day.
if you examine most work that people do, it's done for it's not done for an essential purpose, and often it's done to produce something that's harmful, isn't it? When you examine, the kind of time people spend at work, and if we kind of had a complete audit of that, where you said, right, what we're going to do is focus on stuff that's essential for human well-being and survival, and do all that in a way that was kind of more fulfilling for the people carrying out that work. That's how we need to. But you see, what kind of happened, because of capitalism, and particularly because of neoliberalism, which is like where capitalism has been turned into an ideology and supported by governments, is that it's just like, the aim isn't human well-being and providing the essentials. The aim is profit. The aim is to produce whatever they can con people into buying, in order to provide.
And also the production.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got an example in my own life. I worked for British Steel at one point, but I also worked for Ford's. I was on the production line at Ford's in the famous Dagenham, Essex plant, and there's so much waste going on and so much damage going on because everybody had been turned into kind of robotic kind of producers and everything. And so I do know that the Japanese tried to do an experiment where, rather than somebody like myself, I mean, my job was to put the back axle down and a couple of other things and all the rest of it on hundreds of cars in a shift. Instead of doing that, the Japanese gave a group of workers all the bits of a car, and they would then construct it together, right? Like a Lego set or something. And that was much more fulfilling. Now, I'm not saying that the end product is any better. I'm just saying that in terms of the actual working situation, it was much more human friendly than a production line. But capitalism doesn't care about that. They just want.
Well, capitalism just cares about profit. You see, profit above everything else. And so you've even got things that are essential, like like, why have we got drug companies that operate for profit?
Shouldn't exist.
There was an interesting thing recently in the paper that you've got these kind of patients group that campaign to kind of have certain drugs introduced, and it's been revealed that loads of them are funded by the drug companies. You see, so the drug companies are using these groups of patients to get their drugs onto the market so they can make more profit. So it's kind of not. Then it kind of comes away from health, doesn't it? It comes away from what is really best for people, because you've got the profit motive thrown in, and we don't focus on preventative.
Well, if there's any industry in the world you could think of that ought to be not just nationalized, but kind of what's the globalized?
It needs to
be the pharmaceutical industry, because even COVID proved that when they weren't focused on profit, to the extent that they weren't, and they did kind of cooperate to the extent that they did, it meant that all these things could come online a a lot quicker because they weren't kind of going, oh no, this is kind of like a company secret. You can't have the data and all that.
Yeah.
They shared data and this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
and that's exactly how the pharmaceutical industry, if it's going to exist at all, should work.
Yeah, I mean, this is another huge area where there needs to be a huge audit. Like, first of all, massively more resources need to be put into preventative measures. People living healthily, eating healthily, because because most diseases are caused through lifestyle or environment, aren't they? They're not sort of like genetically inherited things. You see, so that's the way to do it. But of course, that doesn't yield any. There's two reasons that they kind of governments don't do that. First of all, they're hand in glove with the pharmaceutical companies and the bosses of those companies, and so that would be less profit for the the drug makers. And secondly, because they don't think of anything long term. They're looking at quick fixes instead of putting into a long term strategy to improve everyone's health. So we didn't need So we needed far fewer of these pharmaceutical products. Don't do that because that's thinking long term, and that somehow they don't want to do that, or they're not able to do it.
Well, just look at how the fallout from the pandemic, and now you've found in Britain, for example, that all the PPPS, whatever it was called, PPP, whatever it was called, that was all going to mates of the government, and
yeah.
So there are loads of people who've made a hell of a lot of money out of this global catastrophe.
Yeah,
right?
they did.
So we create it by exploiting other animals. We then exploit other animals trying to figure it out in the first place because they did experiments just to find out the characteristics of it, and then they went for the crabs, and then they went for the laboratory tests and everything, and so the other animals, as usual.
At every stage,
on every single
stage, it's the oppression of other animals.
In the meantime, the capitalists make a fortune.
But I suppose probably we're kind of, I suppose we can kind of say a few things in conclusion now, can't we? Because
you can go ahead.
And I'm going to say the usual thing I say in conclusion that veganism.
All together, folks.
Veganism can save the world, but it can only save the world if we make a huge effort to spread the vegan message, and we turn loads more people vegan, and the only people can do that is vegans. So all vegans have got to be active in outreach, and kind of what's probably even more important than that is as many vegans as possible need to be active and encourage other vegans to do outreach. In your local area.
Your tune, Ronnie Lee. You don't usually say that.
No, I don't usually say that. And this is what's vitally important. That like kind of vegans who not only do outreach themselves but act as instigators, getting other vegans in their local area to come and join them in helping with outreach, getting them involved. These people are key. Those people are key to saving the world. Those are the people that will save the world.
We need agitators, not instigators?
We need activists, and more important than activists, we need agitators to get other people active, because there are so many vegans now. Just think of what a force for change that could be if all of those vegans got involved in outreach, even if they only did it a little bit. When you think of that all adding up together. And that is the key. That is the key to saving the world. Veganism is the key to saving the world. But in terms of like, in terms of people, it's the activists and more importantly the instigators that are the key humans in terms of creating this revolution, and that is so important. And we as far as we've only got one shot at living on this earth. And what better could you do than to be involved in activity that actually saves the world? Isn't that the best way you could possibly live? And then, when you come to be dying, you can think, I really did live a life that kind of made an important positive difference.
Yeah, well, that sounds like a good wrap up, especially when it comes to dying. We started off with still alive, and we did that. And so, well, again, we want to thank all the people. We've still got 28 people in various platforms. So thanks very much for sticking with us. And the Ronnie Lee lesson of the week is over. But We'll begin next week, Ronnie, providing
we are still undead, or maybe